All right, well, let's get started. So, yeah, keep throwing in the chat schools you're excited about or when you're taking the DAT. Hopefully, we have a few more people joining us as well. And yeah, let's dive into it. So, let's talk about building a school list. It's that time of year where everybody's getting ready to apply. I know, probably a little bit excited, a little bit nervous about applying to schools, but today is going to be helpful for you in choosing your school list. So, a little bit about me. My name is Brendan, and I just graduated college in April. I took the DAT last year, and last year I applied to dental school. I applied to 15 schools, and I'm grateful to have been accepted to 7 of them. And I think a big part of that was just choosing the right schools. So, yes, it's about having a good application, but it's also about choosing the schools that are a good fit for you. So, today we're going to talk about that. So, the objective is I'm going to walk you through a systematic approach of how you can build your school list from scratch and how you can build one of schools that you're excited about and that you also have a good chance of getting accepted to. And so to do that, I'm going to talk a lot about the ADEA official guide to dental school. Some of you might have heard this, might be new for some of you. And there's a PDF version of this that you can find in the DAT Bootcamp study group on Facebook. If you go to the Files tab, you can find it there. Or that version that we have in the PDF form, it's from last year, and so it has statistics from the year before that. You can purchase the most updated version on the ADA website, and it's a really useful tool. It's got lots of great metrics, like, for example, it can tell you the exact numbers of the average stats for every school of the people they lit in. It'll also tell you the percentiles of like what are the lower DAT scores they take, what are the higher DAT scores they take. It'll also give you information about like the down to the very specific number, how many people applied to each school from out of state, from in-state, how many offers they made, acceptance offers they made to students from in-state, out of state. So there's lots of great materials here. I recommend you check it out, and I'm going to refer to it a lot throughout this presentation. Every time I do, I'm just going to call it the guide because it's kind of a mouthful to say this whole thing. So when I talk about the guide, this is what I'm talking about. But knowing that, we can dive into today. So when you're thinking about applying to dental schools, there's 2 things you need to think about. One is you need to think about what are the schools that want you? Or in other words, there's schools out there that would love to have you join their dental class, and they would love to accept you. And it depends on your stats and what the school is looking for. So these are the schools that we could say you have the best chance of getting into. On the other hand, there's also the schools that you want, or these are the schools that you have the highest desire to go to, you're the most excited to go to. Looking in the comments, so we got Maram, excited about Florida schools, lots of great schools there. Looking at schools in Boston for Xeon, and Manzi, Buffalo, Toro, Boston, those are all great schools. So whatever schools you're interested in, fit in this category of things that you want. So today we're going to talk about how do you identify those types of schools that fit in those categories, and then your school list, how do you build that as a combination of these 2 things? You want your school list to be right in the middle, that overlap between the schools that you're interested in going to and the schools that you have the highest chance of getting into. So throughout this presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments at any time. Like I said, there is a little delay, but I'm going to be checking every once in a while to see if you guys have questions, and I'll try to answer them. So to start, we're going to talk about the schools that you want, or in other words, how do you determine what dental school you want to go to? Any dental school is going to get you the degree. When you finish, you're going to be a dentist, but the experiences and the education can be totally different across schools. So we're going to talk about some different factors here that are really important when determining what school you want to go to. And to find this information, I want to point out a couple resources to you. So when you're learning about different schools, first, it's always a great idea to start with exploring the school websites. If you go to the website, there'll be lots of information about the school. Schools usually like to show off their high achievements or what they're passionate about on their websites. After you dig around on the school website, it's also a good idea to attend any presentations offered by dental schools. So some schools might come and present to your predental club, or they'll offer virtual presentations that you can join. Those are great opportunities to learn more about the specifics of schools because usually they share a lot more beyond just what's on the website. If you don't have any opportunities to attend school presentations, lots of times on websites there's contact information for admissions people, and you can reach out to them and ask them questions specific about their school. I've even seen that several dental schools were willing to meet with me one-on-one over Zoom and just answer a whole bunch of questions I had about the school. So that's also a thing that you could reach out and ask about. Third, it's a really good idea to talk to current students about the school. And what's nice about this is students will give you the full picture and they won't hide anything. So they'll tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly about the school. They'll tell you about their experience as a student and if the school really lives up to what it says it does. And you can also talk to alumni from school who have graduated in the past. Then finally, I'll talk more about this later, but lots of you might have used DAT Bootcamp to prepare for the DAT. I know I did. But we also have application services. So we have many trained professionals who are experts on all the different dental schools, and you can meet with one of them and they can walk you through what schools are the best fit for your application, and they can also help you find more information about schools because they know a lot about all the different dental schools. So as we're talking about all these different categories, keep in mind that if you ever want to know more about some of these things for the schools, those are some ways to find information about them. So let's start with here's some different factors that you might consider when picking a school or determining what school you want to go to the most. Let's start with location. So the location is something that sometimes students don't think about at all when they're considering if they want to apply to a school. But depending on where you go, the environment's going to be very, very different. So here's some things to think about. One, how far away is it from your family and friends? If you grew up on the East Coast, moving out to the West could be a really huge adventure, or depending on your personality, it could be really difficult for you and it might be challenging. Another thing to think about is what is the cost of living like for where you're going to be moving to? I saw a statistic the other day that if you had $100,000 in San Francisco to live off of per year and $50,000 to live off of in Oklahoma, your style of living or quality of life would be the same. So obviously very different depending on where you move to. And think about where you move to, is that going to add on to your debt more because it's very expensive? Also think about what's more important to you. If you want to be in a rural area, for example, like in the West, there's the big wide open mountains, there's desert places with lots of wide open space, or there's big cities that are really busy and have a ton going on. Think about what kind of pace you would prefer. Also, for me, I'm a huge baby when it comes to temperature. So think about, does it get really hot in this place? Does it get really cold? And then also think about what is the school itself like? When I went and interviewed at different schools, I found that some schools felt like they were really ancient and inside it felt kind of like a dungeon. There was no windows, it was very old, where other schools were very nice, very renovated. Once again, some people might not care about that, but it's important to other people. So think about where you'll be spending the next couple of years and how important that is to you. Another thing to think about is the values of the school. So think about what drives you to be a dentist. What do you want to accomplish in your career and in your education? Maybe you can reflect on your personal statement. And schools have a wide variety of mission statements, things that they're passionate about. And so compare, if you're, for example, maybe you were really into community service and you did a lot of service for the underserved community. There's lots of dental schools that make it their mission to really help the underserved, and it's something they're very passionate about. So you might want to find a school that aligns with what's important to you. Also, something I forgot to mention in the beginning, grab a piece of paper and something to write with, or since everything's digital now, get your phone or a notes pad ready, and I want you to write down, when it comes to location, what's most important to you. Do you want to be by the beach? Or do you want to be by ski resorts? Do you want to be close to family? Or do you want to experience something new? So write down what's important to you. And then also with values as well. I know this is a lot to think about off the top of your head, so maybe you can spend more time thinking about it later. But write down, what values do you have in dentistry and in your dental education that you're looking for? So another thing to think about is curriculum. Now, this is kind of hard to summarize, but it's obviously a very big part of your dental education. And some things to think about, for example, are class size. So the smallest dental schools have only 40 students per class. So in your cohort, there'll be 30 something other people, and you get to know each other really well, spend a lot of time together, you know everybody's name. Other schools are huge and can have up to 375, almost 400 students. And that obviously looks very different in your class learning environment, interaction between students. Also, think about, depending on the size of the class, ask schools about what is the student to faculty ratio like. Some schools have a lot of faculty compared to the amount of students. And so students get a lot of one-on-one attention from faculty. They can get all the help they need. Whereas other schools, even a small school, if it doesn't have enough faculty, students might have a harder time getting the help they need from faculty. And then also a question that I always asked every dental student I talk to is, what is the dynamic between students like at your school, or how competitive it is? Some schools that you go to might be very cutthroat, where everybody's trying to outcompete each other and compare themselves to each other. And other schools that have students I've talked to have said that everybody collaborates very well and cooperates and is always trying to help each other. So consider those things when you're thinking about a school that you're interested in. I just saw in the chat somebody asked if this session is recorded, and yes, it will be recorded, so it'll be posted afterwards if you want to go back and review it. Another part of the curriculum to think about is research opportunities. If you've been really into research during your undergrad, or maybe it's something you want to get into, ask schools about if they have lots of opportunities for students. Also figure out, lots of these dental schools are doing really cutting edge research on some very interesting topics. So learn about what topics are they investigating, if that's something you could get involved in. Another thing to think about is learning style. Some universities have problem-based learning curriculums where all the work and learning you do is in small groups, collaborating with each other. Other schools might focus more on a different approach. There's different types of schedules. Some are block schedules where you just do one topic for a week and you only worry about maybe human anatomy for that week or two, then you move on. Other schools, you're taking like 5 to 8 classes at the same time and juggling them. Some schools have a pass-fail curriculum, so you just need a minimum grade to pass, and there's no ranking or grading beyond that, et cetera, et cetera. So think about those things and what you would feel most comfortable with, what you feel like would help you succeed the most. And also another really important aspect of the curriculum is the clinical experience. So in dental school, some schools will get you in the clinic very early. They'll give you a handpiece. You can start working on model teeth and real patients. Other schools, they don't let you really start doing any dental work until your end of second or third year of school. So think about what's important to you, and also think about, how many procedures are being done at this school. So that's another good question to ask admissions people. Ask them, when your students graduate from dental school, how many of each procedure have they done? And some schools will tell you, our students graduate and they've averaged 2 root canals. And other schools might tell you, our students who are graduating have done at least a dozen root canals. The clinical experience can make a big difference when you get out into the field, because if you've done 20 root canals, you'll feel a lot more confident. You'll be able to do it more quickly. That usually means that you can earn more money if you go right into practicing at a school. On the other hand, if you have less clinical experience, it might make it harder when you first get to the workforce. You won't be able to have as much production because you might be a little bit slower. So those are some things to think about. I see a question in the chat asking about how do we know the learning styles of the schools? And this can be some tough information to find. And I would say when it comes to learning styles and all these other things, first look on the website. If you can't find anything on the website, then like we were saying earlier, reach out to an admissions email you see listed on the page, or get in touch with a current student, and you'll probably have to dig a little bit more to find that information. But yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so let's talk about cost. We wish that we didn't have to think about costs, but of course we do. So it's going to vary a lot for different schools, how much money you have to spend to attend. For example, the least expensive schools you can attend for close to almost $100,000, which is on the very, very cheapest end. Other schools can get as expensive as $420,000. And I put this little asterisk right here because even though the tuition and fees might be around $420,000, that usually doesn't represent the additional costs for more fees on top of that and also living expenses. So there are lots of students who are graduating with more than $600,000 of debt when they finish dental school. The average amount of debt is somewhere around $292,000 according to the ADA. So think about, are you going to be paying for school with loans? That's what most students do. Or do you have another way of paying for it? Are you going to be pursuing the HPSP or NHSC scholarships? Some of those programs will pay for your school, so then you don't have to worry about how much the school costs. And the main thing here is you need to figure out, how much debt do you feel comfortable with? Some people will tell you, and some dentists will tell you, go to the most expensive school. It doesn't matter. You'll pay it off in the end. Another dentist might tell you, save as much money as you can. Go wherever's cheapest, no matter what. And it's important for you to find the balance. I don't think there's a right answer somewhere in there. I think it's all about what you think you're the most comfortable with. So I know that lots of times when we think about debt and paying for dental school, it kind of seems like monopoly money almost. It doesn't feel real. So I wanted to take a look together at the dental school loan calculator. You can check this out. It's on Student Doctor Network. But it says if you graduate with the average amount of debt and you're making this much salary, which is a little bit more than the average amount according to their statistics, I'd say that most loan rates, so for unsubsidized loans, it's around this, but usually you'll have to go beyond unsubsidized loans, which have a higher interest rate. So I'm going to put this at about 7.5%. Some interest rates are higher than that, but that's a pretty good average, I feel like. Okay, so if this was your case, and when you graduate dental school, let's say that you paid 23% of every month's income right back into your loans. Then what that would look like if you were making this much and had this much debt, you would pay off your debt in 2048, and the total amount of interest that you would pay would be $284,000. So the amount of interest that you would pay ends up almost being as much as the initial debt itself. But this is going to look different for everybody. Maybe you get right out of school and you're making pretty good money as a new graduate because you go somewhere rural or something like that. And you decide that you want to knock out your debt as soon as possible. So you say, I'm going to pay more than half of my income right back into my loans. Well, in that case, then it would take you a lot less time. You'd have it done by 2031, and this is how much interest you would pay. If you go to a more expensive school, let's say you are graduating with $600,000 in debt, then this number is going to look different for you as well, also depending on how much you pay every single month. So I'd encourage all of you to spend some time in this loan calculator, look at some schools you're interested in, and see how much debt do you feel comfortable with your career goals, and what is your plan to pay it off. Once again, don't let anybody tell you that there is a 100% right way or wrong way to do it, but do look into the different options to get a feel for what debt looks like. Okay, so we talked about cost, and let's talk about match rates. So this is another thing that you can usually find on school websites, or you can ask people at the school about it. But if you are considering specializing in something, then you'll want to pay close attention to this. So some schools have their own specialty programs, like they have their own orthodontics or endodontics program, and they take a lot of students from their own dental school for that. Other schools might not have their own, but they could have really good match rates of getting their students into other specialty programs. So ask about that. And if a school tells you, oh, last year, 95% of our graduates matched with a residency program, do a little bit more digging and ask them, okay, of those people who got matched, how many of them are reapplying from last year because they didn't get in the year before that? Or ask them, how many of these students got into their first choice or top choice residency program? So look a little bit more into it and make sure that you're taking this into account if you're thinking about specializing. Even if you're not thinking about specializing, it still can be worth looking into, because sometimes if a school has really good match rates, it can be an indicator that it's a really high quality education. So it's not always true, but it is a good thing to look out for. Okay, so we've talked about all these different things that you need to consider. And after looking at all these things, either now or maybe later when you have more time, you need to sit down and make your list of what is most important to you. This is just an example I put together, very different from what my ranking was of what's most important to me. But make an order of what things are most important to you. Maybe you really, really want to be close to family, and that's like your number one important thing. And then right behind that is the cost. You want to save as much money as possible. Maybe you're not planning on specializing, so the match rates are at the very bottom of your list. But think about some of these different factors we've talked about and write a list of what's most important to you. And then go out and research schools and figure out what schools match that criteria. So if for example, if location was really important to you, look at the map and see where are there schools located in places that I would love to live. That's a great place to start because you can literally look at a map of it. Then maybe, do some more research to figure out what are the cheapest schools I could go to if that's important for you, et cetera, et cetera. So take some time to do this at some point later. Okay, I'm just checking the chat to see. Yes, so this presentation will be recorded and it will be posted in the DAT Bootcamp study group. So you can always refer back to it later. Okay, so we talked about how to determine which schools you like the most. And now let's go back and we'll talk about how to determine what schools want you or what schools you have the best chance of getting into. And I'm going to take a quick water break. And I'm going to give you this disclaimer. So we're going to talk about how to make your best guesses of what schools you have a better chance of getting into. But I want to let you know that the dental school acceptance process is very, very unpredictable. Meaning that there's no way to look at statistics and say you have a 100% chance of getting into the school. So we can make our best guesses and say this school you have a higher chance of getting into, this school you have a lower chance of getting into, but there's no way to say this school is a lock and no matter what, I'm going to get in. So just putting that out there, keep that in mind. But let's talk about some of these factors that you should consider when figuring out what schools you have the best chance of getting into. So when you start to make your list, I want you to, I know we were thinking about, match rates and great prices for schools and if it's by the beach, all these exciting things, but set all those things out of your mind for a little bit when you're researching this and just focus on what schools do I have the absolute best chance of getting accepted to. And this is where I'm going to refer to the guide a lot more, the ADEA guide that I talked about in the beginning. So let's look at, for example, DAT scores. In the ADEA guide or on school websites, you can find information about the average DAT score for getting into schools. The guide is really effective, especially, this is where I got this information, because not only will it give you averages, but it will also give you these percentiles. So, for example, let's talk about how to interpret this. This is saying that at least 5% of the students who got admitted into, in this case, Harvard, got a 21 on the DAT. And up to 95% of the students got as high as a 28 on the DAT. So what this means is that if you have a DAT score lower than the bottom 5%, then it's not super likely that you'll get into that school. It's going to be pretty tough to get into that school. On the other hand, if you have a DAT score that's close to this upper number, or it's even above that upper number, then you might have a much higher chance of getting into that school based just off DAT. So yes, look at the averages, but also look at these ranges here. So these are just some sample schools I picked. But for example, let's take a look at OHSU. So if you got a 19 on the DAT, that's a good chunk below this academic average. However, you're still above that 5%. You are closer down to it, but you're still above it. So you might still have a good shot just considering DAT to get into that school. So take a look at your DAT score. And I know some of you haven't taken yet. Those of you who have it coming up, once again, good luck. And once you get your score, then compare it to different schools and try to find schools where your score is close to this upper number, or in other words, schools that you're above the average, at the average, or even below the average, as long as you are above this number here. Okay, so spend some time looking at that. And remember too that these are all important parts of your application, but the application process is very holistic, meaning that they're going to look at your DAT, GPA, and especially, they're going to look at volunteer experience, shadowing experience, leadership, letters of recommendation, personal statement. All of those things really, really matter. So remember that just because maybe you have a DAT score that's even above this 95th percentile doesn't mean that you're guaranteed acceptance into that school. Okay, now same thing for GPA. So there's two GPAs that will mainly be considered. One is your cumulative GPA, or your CGPA. That takes into account all the classes you've taken in college. The other is your science GPA, or SGPA. And if you go to the ADEA website, they have information there about how to calculate your science GPA and which classes specifically count towards it and which don't. So take a look at that. I'm also looking at the chat. I'm seeing some more people are wondering if they can see this presentation later. And yes, we are recording it, and so we'll have it posted later for you to go back and see it. So same thing with GPA. Take a look at the averages and then also look at these ranges here. If your science GPA or your cumulative GPA is below this bottom 5th percent number, then it would be really, really tough to get into that school. You'll find as you look at these numbers that some schools value science GPA a lot, maybe more than other schools. You'll find that some schools value DAT more than GPA, some value GPA higher than DAT. So start by maybe comparing your DAT number with a school's average DAT, then compare your GPA. And if both of those numbers are above the average GPA and average DAT, then you're off to a good start with a shot of getting into that school. If both your DAT and your GPA are really close to this low number here or below it, then you have a less good chance of getting into that school. So I know it's hard to quantify exactly like what percentage chance you have, but hopefully you get the idea here of what I'm trying to convey about this. Obviously, schools that have lower GPAs and lower DAT scores generally will be easier to get accepted to. So keep that in mind. Okay, we talked about these two. Those are kind of the two big numbers we always think about. But like I said, there's lots of other intangibles that schools are really going to look at. So for example, your values. Just like how I talked about how you want to find a school that you're excited about and that aligns with your values, schools are looking for applicants that match their values. So for example, maybe a school is really heavy on research. Like they're very, very proud of their research and they want to produce a lot of professionals who are going to go into dental research. If that's something they really care about, they might be really looking for applicants that have undergraduate research experience. So that's just one example. But if you have an experience, like maybe you have a lot of leadership experience, a unique amount of leadership experience, and it's one of your strengths. If you find a school that says that they really value leadership experience when they're looking at applicants, then you might have a little bit higher chance of getting into that school. So don't forget about these intangibles when you're considering different schools. Okay, so I see a question. Can you talk about how GPA is calculated when you went to two colleges? That is a really great question. I would probably refer you to the ADEA website to learn more about that, because I remember I had to calculate my science GPA and they had really good information about how to calculate it and really specific instructions. So I wish I knew more about that. I did all my courses at one undergraduate institution, so I'm sorry I can't help you, but maybe if somebody else in the chat has experience with that, you could message Mariella afterwards and direct her some resources. So hopefully that helps, Mariella. Sorry I can't answer your question all the way. Okay, so this is another big one. In-state versus out-of-state. So I'm going to show you guys an example here. Louisiana State University If you just look at their overall net acceptance rate, it's a 14% acceptance rate, which is for a dental school is pretty high. But if you look into it more, this is information I got from the ADA guide. Their acceptance rate for in-state applicants is 42%, which is crazy, crazy good. So if you are a resident of Louisiana, I don't know if anybody here is a resident of Louisiana, but if you are, just based off that statistic, you have a pretty good shot of getting into Louisiana State, depending, of course, on your stats. Now, if you are not a resident of Louisiana, like maybe most of us here are not, the out-of-state acceptance rate is only 6% for Louisiana State University. So lots of schools have a very, very large difference between the in-state and out-of-state preferences. Lots of schools, if they're a state school or public school, they're required by the state to accept a certain percentage of in-state students, and they're not allowed to accept more than just a handful of out-of-state students. So make sure you look into this, because if you look at Louisiana State University, maybe you have a GPA above their average GPA, you have a DAT score above their average DAT, you have lots of great experience, etc., etc. But if you're applying from out of state, your chances of getting in are very, very slim. If any of you are international applicants, the same thing goes. You can find statistics on that. I've included some of those here. Louisiana State, for example, did not accept a single international student according to this guide from last year. So look at these numbers. They're very important. Schools like, for example, OHSU, Oregon Health and Science University, they accept a pretty good mix. So they took 48% this year or last year, and they took 30% from out of state, which is pretty good. And this isn't 30% of their class was from out of state. This is 30% of out of state applicants were offered a spot at the school. So take a look at all these different statistics and make sure that you're applying to schools that give you a better shot. If you are living in a state that has public schools, make sure you look at those schools. Even if you're like, I'm sick of living here, I want to go somewhere else or whatever, make sure you look at the schools and see, because some of them might have a very high in-state acceptance rate, which means that you have a pretty good chance of getting in. So make sure to look at that. Okay. And then I know I just talked about a handful of these things, but like I said before, there are so many other things that are very, very, very important to your dental school application. Some of these are quantifiable. And what I mean by that is you're shadowing, you have a set number of hours of shadowing. And so anything that's quantifiable, compare it to minimum cutoffs from the school. For example, some schools have a minimum requirement of 100 shadowing hours, or they will not consider your application. So if you're looking at a school, maybe you're in-state, you have stats above the average, etc., but if you only have 80 shadowing hours and they require 100, your chances of getting in are not good. Also, letters of recommendation. Schools have minimum requirements of, lots of schools consider they require one from a dentist and one from a science professor, or maybe two from professors in college and one from an employer, etc. So make sure that you meet the minimum requirements and see which schools do you match the requirements for shadowing, for letters of rec, also for prereqs. Now, pretty much all schools are okay if you don't have all your prereqs done when you apply, as long as you have a plan to finish them before you would start attending school. So also other non-quantifiable things, like no schools have a minimum cutoff of you have to have this many leadership hours, or most don't have for service hours either. But I really can't stress how important all these things are. And for these things that are quantifiable, the quality also is so, so important. So depending on how much experience you have with all of these things, this can make a big difference in the strength of your application. So if you feel like you have a lot of really great shadowing and you've learned a ton, and maybe you've even done research, which not a lot of people have, and you've done a ton of service you've gotten really involved with, all these things can make your application stronger. And then when you're looking at, let's say you're looking at GPA, if your GPA is the exact same as the average for a school, but you have a lot of strength and bulk in your application in these other things, then the fact that your GPA is average might be totally fine, and you might be able to still get in. So also take into consideration those things when you're considering how good of a shot you have of getting into a school. Okay, I'm going to check TAT again. So I'm just seeing your question about where did I get these stats. These stats are all from the ADEA guide, official guide to dental schools. So I would highly recommend checking it out. There's a PDF version you can access right now in the DAT Bootcamp study group. It's under the Files tab on the Facebook page. And there are so many statistics in there, very, very in-depth. It's the most updated and accurate information you can get. The version we have on the Facebook group is a year outdated, but you can purchase the most recent version. So yeah, I would highly recommend checking that out. Okay, so now that we've talked about some of these things, you're going to need to sit down and determine what schools do you have the best chance of getting into. So look at your stats, look at your values, your experience, et cetera, and especially consider, right, if you're applying in-state and out-of-state, how important that is for schools. And try to make a list of, I only wrote down 6 things here, but maybe closer to like 20 or even more schools of the best chance you have of getting into, if you had to guess based on all your stats and stuff. And then the second best chance you have of getting in, third best chance, fourth, et cetera. These first couple ones might be an in-state or school or two that accept a lot of students from your state. And make a whole list ranking all the schools that if you just had to get in anywhere, where do you think that would be? So I'm going to take another water break, but you guys think about that. You're not going to have time to do it right now. So maybe later take some time and think about these things and make that list of where you think you have the best chance of getting in. Okay, so we've talked about schools that you want to attend, how to determine that, what to think about when determining schools that want to accept you. And like I said before, now the trick is finding the overlap between those two things. If you have these two lists of the schools that you love the most in the whole world and the schools that you think you have the best shot of getting into of all the schools, then finding the overlap between these two. So let's talk about that. Okay, so first off, I know there's a lot of debate about, okay, when I'm narrowing down this list, how many schools should I apply to? And it's going to be different for everybody. Usually, I would recommend no less than 8 schools, and 16 schools is a good max. If you apply to more than 16 schools, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I typically recommend applying more on this higher side than the lower side. Now, I know a lot of times it's a concern because applying to dental schools is expensive, and I know that it does cost a lot of money. If you were to apply to around 15, 16 schools, it might cost you around $3,000 just for the fees to apply. And that's no small potatoes, right? That is a lot of money. Not everybody has that money just lying around. However, if you're about to go to dental school, most of us are going to, in dental school, like the average amount of debt is $292,000. And most people are going to have to pay for it with loans by taking out loans. So even if, let's say you're in school right now, and if you really need to take out some unsubsidized loans to have enough money to apply to more schools, the amount that you would spend to apply to 15 schools is nothing compared to the amount of debt that it's going to cost to go to school. So I know this is some reasoning people use a lot, and the worst case scenario, if you apply to too many schools, is that you spent some more money than you had to, and maybe you end up with some more options than you otherwise would have. The worst case scenario, if you apply to too few schools, is that you don't get accepted into any schools, or maybe you only end up getting into one school and that's your only option, which, don't get me wrong, right, would still be great. We'd all love to just get into one school. So usually right out of school, private practice owners average an income of $170,000 a year right out of school. So this cost that you spent to apply if you don't get in the first time you apply and you have to apply another year, that extra year you could have spent working, maybe making this much, more or less, if you would have applied to more schools. Hopefully that makes sense. Once again, I know I'm sounding pretty biased towards applying to more schools, but if you feel like lower, closer to this number is good for you, that's also great. So apply broadly. Okay then. So how do you strike this balance, right? I drew up this graph. This is supposed to depict, and I'd recommend you do this actually. So later when you have more time, draw out a graph like this. This x-axis here is showing desire to attend. So the further you go to the right, the more you want to go to that school. The y-axis here is showing your likelihood of acceptance. So once again, this is hard to predict, but thinking about these things we talked about, GPA, DAT, in-state versus out-of-state, etc. Up here at the top are the schools that you feel like, of all the schools, you have the best shot of getting in. Schools down here, you have the worst shot of getting in. So then take the schools. I remember I told you to make those two lists of the schools you would love to go to most in the world, the schools that you feel like you have the best shot of getting into, and plot them on this graph. Now, if you're studying for the DAT and you're doing a lot of QR, you might be like, I'm sick of graphs. I don't want to draw a single one more, but just give this one a shot and draw out. So maybe this school right here, let's say this school is LSU at Louisiana State University. Maybe your desire to attend, like you don't really want to go to it that much. It's like right here. And maybe your chance of getting in is about right here too. So that's probably not a great school for you to apply to. But other schools, maybe this school up here, this is a school that you really want to go to based off of, location, cost, values, etc., these things we talked about. And it's a school that you feel like you have a higher chance of getting into than other schools. So kind of draw out these quadrants, and when it comes time to choosing those 8 to 16 schools, you want to start with this quadrant here. These schools that you have the highest desire to attend and the highest chance of getting into are going to be your best bet. I think a lot of times, we've all heard those stories of somebody who applies to dental school and they applied to 10 schools, they had great stats, and they didn't get in anywhere. And you worry, well, if this person with awesome stats couldn't get in out of these 10 schools, how do I have a shot of getting in? I think a lot of times it's because students make the mistake of only applying to schools down here. Maybe they really, really want to go to University of Washington. And that's like their dream school to go to. But University of Washington really only accepts students from Washington, and they have really high average stats. So if you only apply to schools down here, then you might end up not getting in. So starting here is good. And then also, I would say, apply to schools in this range too. Apply to schools that, like this school right here, maybe you don't really want to go to it that much. Like it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but you have a pretty good shot of getting in. And even this one, if you feel like you have a really, really good shot of getting in, but you don't want to go there that much, but you're like, yeah, I could make it work, then I would say apply there. And also, don't be afraid to throw in some reach schools. So, maybe this school right here, maybe you really want to go and you feel like you don't have the best odds, but you still want to give it a shot. I say go for it. There's a school that I applied to that I felt like was around here for me. I didn't feel like I had that good a shot of getting in, but I thought it'd be really cool to go. And so I applied and I ended up getting in. So I'm really glad I applied to it. However, I also applied to lots of schools around this range. So I know I'm talking graphs here and scatter plots, but hopefully the idea I'm trying to convey makes sense. And I would recommend really, plot out this graph and put every school that you're thinking about on this graph, and then take this upper right-hand corner and schools around here. Now, you might not have any schools in this quadrant. Maybe all the schools that you feel like you have the best shot of getting in, maybe none of them you really want to go to. And that's okay. You still, I would say, apply to them if you feel like you have a good shot of getting in. Okay. Hopefully my graph made sense. Next, I would say, eliminate the right schools from your list. So when you make your final list, before you hit submit, go back through and see, are any of these schools that you would absolutely refuse to attend? Like, if this was your only acceptance, would you say no? And if you would say no to that school, if it was your only acceptance, take it off the list. There's absolutely no use in applying to a school that you would refuse to go to if it was your only choice. So cross all those schools off your list. And then also take a look at, do schools regularly accept students similar to you? So this is like what we were talking about before. Compare all your statistics and see, is this school accepting students from out of state? Are they accepting students regularly with your stats from your background? There's even more statistics you can look at in the guide. And I would say compare all those stats to you. And if you're seeing that they almost never take students with your background and your stats, then maybe cross that school off your list. So that is about it for today. I also just wanted to mention once again, DAT Bootcamp application services. So if you're having a little bit of a hard time or you really want to pin down your school list, you can meet with somebody from DAT Bootcamp that is a professional and an expert through and through about dental school application. And they can sit down with you and they'll actually have you give them your application. And then they'll go through using their knowledge based on schools and previous history with applicants. And they will build you a customized list of all the schools they think that you should apply to. And then they'll give you a list of the pros and cons of each of them. So telling you why each school might be good for you, why it might not be good for you, and roughly how they feel about your chances of getting in. So you can go to DAT Bootcamp's website to learn more about that. But I want to thank you guys all for coming today. I'm going to open up the rest of the time that we have left to any questions. So once again, I know there's a lag in the chat, but if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the comments, and I'm happy to give the best advice I can. And just remember when you're building your school list, it's going to take some time. So like I said, take some time and sit down to figure out what is most important to you of these different factors, and also what schools meet your criteria of what's valuable to you. Take some time to research schools, and then, do some digging to really see how you can strike this balance and figure out what schools are in this range for you. So the stronger your application, the more options you're going to have up here, right? You'll have more schools you have a higher chance of getting into. And another piece of advice I would give to you is be picky for some schools, but also don't be too picky. So we all know that it'd be great if we could just choose whatever school we wanted to go to and automatically go there, but it's really difficult to get accepted into dental school, and lots of times we're going to have to make compromises. So don't be afraid to apply to schools that you feel like you have a good chance of getting into, even if it's not your dream school. At the end of the day, any school that is accredited by the ADA is going to get you a dental education, and you are going to be a dentist when you're finished. So remember that. And thank you, DAT Bootcamp has posted in there the link to application services in the comments, so you can check that out. And yeah, I'll stick around to answer any questions you guys have. But if you don't have any questions, thank you for coming today, and good luck building your school list. So have a good rest of your day.